Chapter 26 of Judge Burnham's Daughters. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Judge Burnham's Daughters by Pansy. Chapter 26. Under Guidance. I know it is possible that you may have heard the same reports, but I told Mr. Bacon this morning that I did not believe you knew anything about it, and I was just going to try to do as I would be done by. A nervous little laugh finished the sentence, and then Mrs. Bacon launched a question that covered the ground over which she had just gone. Do you know anything of Mrs. Hamlin's circumstances, my dear Mrs. Burnham? I have not heard from her or of her since she left her father's house on the evening before her sister was buried, Ruth said, with steady voice but rising color. The unnatural relations that now existed in the disorganized family were sources of continual embarrassment to her. I was sure of it, affirmed Mrs. Bacon, with an air of relief. I was sure that your kind heart would lead you to act in the matter, now that in your husband's absence the responsibility falls on you. Well, my dear, I will not make a longer story than is necessary. It is said that her husband has gone from bad to worse. He has been getting into very dangerous relations again with certain men, gambling, you know, and, well, I am afraid forging notes. Mr. Bacon thinks it will hardly be possible to save him from state prison this time. We have also heard that he has kept his wife in a very straitened condition. They have changed boarding places several times, even in these few months, and always, I am told, of necessity, because they were in arrears with board. And only last night I heard, from what I am afraid is a reliable source, that he had deserted her, and that she was really in very destitute circumstances. Do you know where she is to be found? It was the only question that Ruth's lips seemed able to frame. Yes, I do. I took special care to learn. She is on Court Street, away down toward the river, in one of those long houses, on the 3rd floor back. I don't wonder you start, Mrs. Burnham. It is terrible to think of Judge Burnham's daughter in a tenement house on Court Street, isn't it? However, you will be able to write all that. If the man must really go to prison, why, the poor thing will be rid of him at least. She had risen as she spoke, and was drawing her wrap about her with the air of one who had done her part in the best way she knew, and Ruth, quivering in every nerve, with a sense of shame for her husband's sake, yet had sense enough to feel that this good woman had done the best that the circumstances would admit, had really said the only comforting thing that could be said, even though what comfort there was must grow out of the fact of there being prisons for convicted criminals. Verily, Minta Burnham had chosen for herself. What to do was the imperative question staring Ruth in the face, demanding immediate reply. She was by no means so clear of her course, or of her ability to accomplish, as Mrs. Bacon seemed to be for her. Of course, something must be done. A daughter of Judge Burnham's could not be left in a Court Street tenement house alone. Yet would she, at Ruth's request and under her care, go elsewhere? And if so, where was the suitable place for her, and what was the next step to take? It was all bewilderment, and while she struggled with it, she could not tell whether to be glad or sorry that Judge Burnham was absent. If he were at home, he would know just what to do. But were not the chances that he would do the wrong thing? Yet what was the right thing? Troubled exceedingly by these and kindred questionings, she yet made herself ready with all speed for a journey to town. Erskine came, questioning. Why were they not to have a geography lesson? Why was she going to town? Could he go along? He would like to go to the city very much. No, his mother said, he could not go with her this time, because she had something to do in which he would be in the way. What was that? He wanted to know. And smiling faintly over the apparent incongruity of her statements, she confessed that she did not know what she was going to do. "Why, Mama," he said in great amaze, "then how can you do it?" She couldn't, she explained, not until she learned. She was to try to find out what was the wise and right thing to do in a matter of great perplexity. Over this statement Erskine considered for a moment, then came his wise, sweet question that went to the root of things. "Why don't you ask God to tell you?" "I will," she said, turning toward him with a smile that yet was very close to tears. It was a surprising thing when one stopped to look at it. She, a Christian woman, hurrying to an emergency that she consciously did not know how to meet, yet taking no time to consult, not only the acknowledged source of all wisdom, but one who had graciously said, "Ask of me." She held out her hand to Erskine, and the two knelt in their accustomed place of prayer, while Erskine voiced the request that the dear Lord Jesus should show Mama just what he wanted her to do. "Do you know now?" he asked her cheerily, a moment after. Evidently there had not entered into the child's mind a question as to her doing, without fail, whatever the Lord Jesus wanted done. "Has he told you yet, Mama?" "Not yet," she said, smiling over his lesson on faith. "Oh, well, he will, I'm sure he will, and he'll do it in time." And in the light of this earnest assurance she went to her task. The lower part of Court Street was not used to carriages such as the one which Mrs. Burnham summoned to her aid. There was much staring from behind half-closed blinds, and the noisy following of certain ragged little boys and girls who felt no need of blinds to hide behind. The stairs were somewhat narrow and somewhat steep, and a very slatternly girl, from whose contact Ruth carefully held her dress, toiled upward just ahead of her to show the way. Dinginess increased upon them as they mounted, and the third story back was destitute of anything like comfort. A well-known voice answered Ruth's hesitating tap, and still uncertain what to do, or how to make known her errand, if she had one, she entered, and stood face to face with Minta Hamlin. "Oh, it is you!" This was her greeting, intense astonishment bristling in every letter, and then the two women stood and looked at each other. Certainly the situation was striking. Several times in their lives had these two confronted each other under sufficiently startling circumstances, but neither, perhaps, had ever felt it more than at this moment. The beautiful girl of Mrs. Burnham's memory had changed even in these short months. Her face was almost deathly pale, even in this moment of excitement, and her hair was pushed straight back from her forehead in unbecoming plainness. She wore a dark silk dress which had once been pretty, but which was now drabbled and torn. The lace of one sleeve hung in careless frays, the skirt was daubed with something which looked like paint, and one elbow was worn to a decided hole. The furniture of the bare and cheerless room matched the dress of its mistress. Shabby remnants of bygone finery is a sentence which sufficiently describes it. And in this room Minta Hamlin, who in her father's house was accustomed to all the elegancies, and to all the trained attention that money will furnish, was apparently preparing, with very insufficient appliances, to do some washing for herself. A small hand bath tub filled with suds occupied a perilous position on a slippery chair that was once upholstered in haircloth, and a pile of soiled clothing lay on the floor. That the girl looked miserably ill would have been apparent to the most casual observer; and the hollow cough which she frequently gave reminded Mrs. Burnham each time she heard it of Seraph. "Well," she said at last, after that prolonged silence, accompanied by a haughty stare, "to what am I indebted for this most unexpected honor? You did not send up your card, so I was not prepared. I thought it was my landlord." Even then there was a mocking smile on her face, as of one who could almost enjoy the embarrassment, because of the fact that it must be a very embarrassing moment to the other person. Just then came a knock at the door, quite unlike Ruth's timid one; sharp and imperative. The opening of the door, almost immediately afterward, threw Ruth just back of it, and the intruder did not see her. He was a young man, with an impudent face and a voluble tongue. "I have called once more for the money," he began, "and we may as well understand one another this time. I don't propose to climb these stairs again for nothing. Either you give me the month's rent now, or else you walk out of this flat without any more delay. People cannot expect to rent furnished flats with nothing but promises. And I have instructions to—" He did not finish his sentence. All the Erskine blood, which in its way was certainly as intense as any that belonged to the house of Burnham, seemed to boil in Ruth's veins as she heard her husband's daughter thus familiarly and insolently addressed. It increased her indignation to discover that the girl woman who confronted the man was pallid with terror, and evidently felt herself to be in his power. "He'll do it in time, mamma." Erskine's last assuring words, mingling with his good-bye kisses, seemed to sound in her ears. Did God tell her what to do in this crisis of her life? She thought of it wonderingly afterwards, the painful doubt of the moment before, the instant decision flashing upon her from somewhere. "You forget yourself strangely, sir," she said, stepping with the air of a princess from behind the half-open door. "If you have any claim on this lady you may present your bill at Judge Burnham's office, 263 4th Street, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and it will be paid." The alarmed young man made confused efforts to apologize, to explain, but he might as well have attempted to address an iceberg. There could be no explanation, the lady said, which could justify the use of such language to a woman. All she wished of him was to retire, which he did in haste and dismay. And then Ruth speedily forgot him in the unexpected work she found for thought and hands. The poor haughty girl who had tried to be so self-sufficient, and so daring in her insolence, had suddenly felt her strength giving way. The room spun dizzily around her, then grew dark and wavered in that sickening fashion which is the last conscious feeling that the victim to a fainting fit remembers. And but for Ruth's sudden spring to her side she would have fallen. It was very unpoetical what followed. Ruth could not get her charge to a chair. The utmost that her strength could accomplish was to lay her gently on the dingy carpet, then look about for water. The soap-suds in the bath-tub was the only liquid at hand. There was no help for it but to dip her hastily ungloved hand into the foam and bathe the pallid face with it. It was well, perhaps, for all concerned that there was no disinterested looker-on to view the ludicrous side of this scene. It was really the first conscious thought of the proud girl as she came slowly back to life. She darted a suspicious glance at her step-mother and attempted to push her ministering hand away and rise to a sitting posture. But Ruth, as she splashed the soapy water right and left, was too manifestly absorbed in ministering, to the best of her powers, to have room for any other thought. "You are better now?" she said inquiringly. "Oh, I would not try to move just yet. Let me put my arm under your head, so, and lie still just a few minutes longer." The tone was gentle, soothing, as she might have spoken to a frightened child. And Minta, who had never in her life, save in these 5 miserable weeks just past, known what it was to think of and plan for her own necessities, and who was amazed and frightened and miserable in every possible way, struggled for just another minute to regain her haughty voice and speak her repelling words, then suddenly covered her white face with both hands and burst into a perfect storm of tears. "Poor child!" said her step-mother, wholly sympathetic and pitiful. "Poor frightened child! I do not wonder you are overcome. The wretch to dare to speak to you as he did! Never mind, he has gone away, and will be quite sure not to return." Then from that mysterious inner source of strength there came to her, not by thinking it out, but someway entirely as a matter of course, what to do. She spoke as though the matter had been planned for weeks. "I have a carriage at the door. As soon as you are able to move, it will do you good to get into the open air. This room is stifling. We will drive directly home. I will just lock this door, and send Mrs. Barnes to attend to everything. Come, Minta, I would try not to cry so much. It will take your strength, and you need it to get ready." She had not meant to go home, this angry girl who had not yet sufficiently reached her right mind not to suppose herself ill-treated in some way. She had not expected to have the chance to go, during these later weeks. but she assured herself bitterly that if she were to have the chance, she would spurn it with scorn. She had been surprised to see her step-mother, but, true to her plans, had tried to summon the scorn. But she was utterly alone. Her husband, for whom she had risked everything, had cruelly deserted her, under circumstances of peculiar misery. She was entirely without money or friends. She was in a strange part of the city, the very noises of which kept her in a state of fear day and night. She was faint for lack of proper food. She had despised her supper the night before, and loathed her breakfast that morning. She had not known what she could say to the landlord's agent when he called again, and had gotten ready that tub of soap-suds, and made her pitiful preparations to wash, under the dim impression that when he should turn her into the street, it would be better for her to have clean clothes to carry. But as she lay there limp and helpless on the floor, with the absurd incongruity of one's thoughts in moments of high excitement, she remembered the little heap of soiled clothes, and it seemed to her that she could never, never get them washed. And then there came another knock on the door, and she had so far recovered as to make a desperate effort to struggle into the little cane-seat rocker, the only touch of comfort which the room held. It was Ruth who answered the knock, and held open the door in dignified silence, while the woman who had the general charge of all these flats stood and looked at her in open-mouthed astonishment, and finally said, "Oh, I didn't know." What she did not know was not explained. It might have taken a very long time. Mrs. Burnham was a woman who, however she might question and delay, on ordinary occasions, in an emergency knew just what to say. The present seemed to her an emergency. "Do you want anything?" she asked with gentle dignity. And the woman murmured that she thought she heard a noise and didn't know but, and then she stopped. "You did not know but you might help us," finished Ruth pleasantly. "Thank you, you can. Mrs. Hamlin is not well. She has been quite faint, but is better now, and I want to take her away immediately. If you will see that the halls and stairs are clear of idle children, so we can reach the door and my carriage without annoyance, I will take care that you are paid for your kindness. I will lock Mrs. Hamlin's room and take the key with me. I shall send my housekeeper to attend to her property here as soon as possible, and after that you may let the proper persons know, if you please, that the room is vacant." The miserable young wife could not have told, afterwards, how it was that she, who had meant to be so independent of her home, should have been thus easily managed; but she felt so weak and faint, and the thought of getting out of that dreary room into the fresh air was so inspiriting, and her step-mother was so prompt and matter of course in all her movements, that really the fact was, the girl was lying back among the cushions, being whirled toward her old home, before she had rallied enough to think what she must do next. As for Mrs. Burnham, the uppermost thought in her mind was one of surprise that there could have been any doubt as to what to do. Chapter 27. Recording by Trisha G.